we'll kick off. Great. So hello, everyone, formally. My name is Samantha Musoke. I'm the project director for IFR4NPO for Humentum. I'm calling in from the UK, but normally I live in Uganda, where I've lived for 20 years. Really warmly welcome as participants representing hopefully a range of stakeholders from across the region of the Caribbean. This meeting is part of a series of regional events that we've been holding to promote engagement with the consultation paper that we issued in January. I'm joined by Karen Sanderson, who's the IFR4NPO project director at CIPFA. I'll tell a bit more about that later. And Karen will be taking us through the majority of our time together today. If you haven't done already, please do take this opportunity to introduce yourself using the chat function in Zoom. You can just put your name, your organization and your country, and that will just help us to know who we have in the room. Hopefully you'll notice that we have a live transcript available, which is especially for the benefit of the hard of hearing. If you don't want it activated, you can turn it off. That it doesn't distract you, and if it's helpful, then we hope that's useful for you. Great, so our agenda today is quite long. We have 3 and a bit hours. I've put the start time as 00 because we're all in different time zones, but we'll basically move fairly swiftly through and respect your time. If you do have comments or questions as we go along, please use that chat function, and we'll do our best to answer these during the session or follow up after the meeting as needed. You'll see in the agenda that we have 3 slots for topics where we're going to break out into discussion groups and have a chance to hear your thoughts. And we hope you're really looking forward to hearing, sharing your thoughts and your ideas in that time. I really want to be clear that today's discussion is intended to help you better understand the consultation paper and for us as a project team to better understand your thoughts and perspectives. So it really is a two-way conversation. But the comments that you make here in this meeting don't constitute a formal response to the consultation. And would really strongly encourage you to submit your own response separately. We'll let you know how to do that later. So let me start with a very brief project overview to set the scene and bring us onto the same page. Some of you may have attended the country awareness meeting that was hosted by our country champion in Jamaica a few months ago, but some of you, this might be the first event you've attended. So I just want to very briefly bring us on the same page. So in March this year, the EU Commissioner, Yanis Lenarčič, I think, created something of a stir when he said that the biggest barrier to localization is the administrative capacity of local actors when it comes to accountability, transparency, and sound financial management. So in saying that, he implied that the reason the EU and other donors don't give directly to non-profit organizations operating in countries where funds are needed is because of concerns about capacity and financial transparency. But I think we would argue that capacity problem is only one side of the story. It's also about having an agreed standard to aim for and work towards. So non-profit financial reporting standards do exist in a few countries, and there they define and harmonize accountability and transparency, and have had a huge impact on public confidence and the sector's credibility. But most countries, and my understanding is that none of the countries in the Caribbean region have national accounting standards specific to the non-profit sector. So international financial reporting standards, if we had them, if they were developed with input from all stakeholders, there would be a really important way to create a level playing field. I think it's easy to sort of think about the IFR4NPO project as a sort of techie accounting initiative, but actually its aims should really be seen in the context of localization, of decolonization, and of shifting the power in our sector. So I am really excited that Humentum and CIPFA are right at the center of this work. I appreciate these are long meetings and the consultation paper might not be your chosen bedtime reading, but if you work also for an NPO or a donor, then responding to accounting consultations is not in your job description, and it's probably something you've never done before. But really want to thank you for being here, and we want to make you feel comfortable and that this is something that you could do even if it's for your first time. So on this slide here, you can see the project's theory of change in a nutshell, and some of the current challenges that have been expressed by non-profit organizations, by funders, auditors, and regulators stem from this fact that there are no internationally agreed standards for non-profit financial reporting. So this results in inconsistency both within and between different countries. We get duplication with organizations producing different reports for different users, even sometimes the same transactions just reported in different ways to donors or regulators. And it means there's a high burden of inefficient financial reporting, both for the producers and the preparers, but also for the users. And that time cost is obviously links into high financial costs as well. So what we also see is that because donors have a focus on project-based financial reports rather than entity-wide accountability, we do see this risk of double funding fraud, which makes it harder to spot as well. Fundamentally, what the situation that we have, it kind of damages trust and credibility in the sector and creates a barrier to funding. So it's our hope that once this guidance that we're developing is widely adopted by different jurisdictions, once it's endorsed as best practice by donors, it will help build a more resilient and accountable sector. It will level the playing field for access to funding and bring more equity too. That's our hope. So who is actually behind this project? Who's leading it? Where it's being run by Humentum and CIPFA. Both of us are non-profit organizations ourselves. So this project really is by the sector, for the sector. Humentum is an association of, well, how can I put it? We're an organization that supports, we have members who are non-profit organizations, but also clients, and we support the non-profit sector in excellence in their operations in various ways. CIPFA is the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy based in the UK, a professional accounting organisation with a unique role in standard setting in the UK, but purely in the public sector, not the private sector. So together we've got a great partnership and complementarity in what we're able to bring to the project. We also have a technical advisory group drawn from the accounting standard setting community, and then also a practitioner advisory group drawn from different parts of the globe who have different roles within the sector. And they are our sort of sounding boards for ideas, and they help us to chart a path through. They've helped us draft the consultation paper that we're now putting out for global feedback. In addition to those advisory groups, the project is overseen by a small steering group. And you might notice a Jamaican flag there. The chair of the steering group is none other than Pamela Monroe-Ellis, the Auditor General of Jamaica. Very proud to have her on our team. I can't see right now if she's with us already today, but if you are, Pamela, thank you. So all these wonderful members work on a voluntary basis, and there's more information about them on the website. I should mention we also have a member of the PAG, the Practitioner Advisory Group from Barbados, Marcia Brandon, who unfortunately wasn't able to be with us today. She sent apologies just before the meeting. So in terms of, that's a bit about the who, and I'll come to the country champions in a minute, but that's a bit about the who is actually delivering the project. But in terms of the how and the when, it's being delivered in 3 phases, consistent with the processes used in setting all international accounting standards. We've just completed the first phase with the publication of the consultation paper at the end of January. And we're now moving into the development phase. And these meetings that we're having with you will provide really important input to the project's next steps. So our timetable for the rest of the project will depend a bit on the amount and the nature of feedback that we get from the consultation paper, but we're working towards a draft of the guidance for consultation in 2023 and final guidance in 2025. And that probably sounds like it's taking a very long time, but that's pretty quick in terms of accounting standard development. And it's really so that there's time for this consultation, buy-in, going backwards and forwards, and really getting something that is the best fit for purpose that it can be. So that engagement side of it is really important to getting a good quality product at the end. So you can see from this snapshot, the map that you have up, that we have actually made fantastic progress in raising awareness and engaging stakeholders all over the world, including international and local nonprofit organizations, regulators, donors, auditors, and the accounting community. So on the slide there, the blue countries are countries where people have signed up and registered their interest. Then you can also see the PAG members and the TAG members, the yellow and the blue, the red flags. And crucially, we have country champions, including, I hope is with us, our country champion for Jamaica, Jeanette. And our country champions are so important in helping us raise awareness about the project in their own countries. And they understand the context and the in each different country and the culture and everything. So thank you, Jeanette. And we also have a donor reference group. So donors obviously are a really influential and important stakeholder group for this project. So the donor reference group includes the World Bank, USAID, the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office in the UK, and others. But as a project, we don't represent any one stakeholder group. We're here to try and make sure we hear from all of them so that we can produce something that balances the needs and gets a best fit. So there we go. With that very brief introduction, let me hand over to Karen Sanderson from CIPFA, who'll take us through an introduction to the consultation paper and all of our topics for today. Thanks, Karen.
Thanks very much, Sam. And as Sam has said, you know, the objective of this project is to provide guidance that is internationally applicable and it can address known problems in non-profit financial reporting. And that's what we're going to be focusing on for the rest of our meeting today. The project has got 3 objectives for developing the guidance. The first is concerned with improving the quality, transparency and credibility of financial reports from non-profit organisations with international high quality guidance that is relevant no matter where you are in the world, really sitting at the heart of that. The second objective is about providing information that is useful to the users of financial reports for accountability and decision making, and in doing so, balancing the needs of users and preparers. And then the final objective is around addressing accounting issues that are specific to non-profit organisations, and that's to help promote comparability. And all of the proposals for the development of the guidance throughout the project will be done with these objectives in mind, kind of create a frame for how we take forward the work that we're doing. So where do we start? The consultation paper, as Sam said, came out earlier on this year, and it's been produced to develop the conversation about financial reporting for non-profit organisations. It is really to engage with you and others across the world about what is needed to improve financial reporting in the sector globally. And we know that the consultation paper contains a lot of information. As Sam said earlier, it's not a bedtime read, but the main elements are in part 1 that cover general reporting issues, and in part 2, which covers specific accounting issues. Part 1, as you can see in front of you, is divided into 5 chapters. And in our meeting today, we'll be touching on all of these chapters. The chapters focus on which types of organisation do we think will benefit from the guidance, who are the users of their information, and what is important to these users. Because at the heart of standard setting are the needs of users and producing information that is relevant and of common interest to them, and that we're considering this in the NPO context. We will also cover the 2 core premises behind the development of the guidance, which are in chapter 3. And then finally, we'll come on to the last 2 chapters that look at the extent to which current international standards meet the needs of non-profit organisations and the model we propose to use for non-profits that leverage both international and national standards. And the consultation on all of these chapters closes on the 30th of July of this year. Turning to part 2 of the consultation paper, this looks at NPO specific accounting issues. And the final session of our meeting today, we will look at whether we've captured all of these issues and how we've prioritized them for inclusion in the first set of guidance. The issues identified to date cover all aspects of financial reporting, including revenue, expenses, assets, as well as the presentation and disclosure information. So a really broad range of topics. We will be holding further outreach sessions later in the year to discuss each of these proposed topics individually. And we're not going to be going to, or someone got their mic on. If you could make sure all your mics are turned off, that would be great. We want to make sure that there's sufficient time to consider all of the topics in the consultation paper. And as a consequence, part 2 will close on the 24th of September. So there's a bit longer to look at this and to hear closer to the time our thoughts on it. So now we're going to turn to our first topic area. And in this topic, we're going to look at the definition of NPOs, as well as identifying stakeholders and their needs, and then the 2 premises that sit behind the proposed guidance. Just before we sort of dive into this, I think I should explain that what we mean when we're talking about the term non-profit organisations in this project. It may not be a term that you are personally familiar with, but we wanted to have a term that could cover a range of entities. And we recognise that people in jurisdictions may be more familiar with terms like NGOs, like charities, membership organisations, charitable trusts. But with the inclusion of organisations as diverse as churches, universities and hospitals, the range of entities that could be NPOs is really, really huge. And because of this diversity, we don't believe that it's possible to provide internationally applicable guidance that has a single definition that is going to cover everything or every kind of organisation that might benefit from the guidance. So in the consultation paper, we propose that non-profit organisations are defined by reference to 4 broad characteristics. The characteristic approach that we are proposing means that an organisation might be an NPO if it meets any 4 of the characteristics that is on the slide in front of you. It's not a requirement that all 4 characteristics need to exist. It could be any combination or just one. So 3 of the characteristics are concerned with an organisation working for social benefit rather than producing a return for investors. And these characteristics include delivering services for public benefit, surpluses or profits being used to deliver services for public benefit, and also for assets not being held for social benefit, and rather, sorry, I should say assets being held for social benefit rather than being held for financial return to investors. The public benefit underpins all of those. In addition, we are proposing a characteristic that is around voluntary funding, which we recognise could be significant for some organisations. The existence of voluntary funding might also be important to distinguish non-profit organisations from governments, from the public sector, because the public sector governments tend to work for social benefit too, but their funding doesn't generally come from voluntary sources. So that could be a defining moment. We recognise that definitions of non-profit organisations already exist internationally, but we don't feel that these have been designed for financial reporting purposes. For example, the statistical framework used internationally has a definition of non-profits that does not recognise that some entities produce profits that are used for public benefit. So as you'll see from the slide in front of you, there are private market bodies, in other words, they're not-for-profit bodies that we might consider to be not-for-profit for financial reporting purposes because of the intent of where the monies are going. So what we need for a financial reporting doesn't quite fit with this particular widely used statistical framework, but many of the underpinning characteristics are the same. So to a certain extent, there is a degree of commonality. So let's turn to stakeholders and their needs. And the consultation paper proposes 4 stakeholder groups. The first of those are service users, and those are the individuals and organisations that directly benefit from the work of a non-profit organisation. The second group are what we call resource providers. Those are the, again, individual and organisations that provide funds and assets to NPOs. This could be through donations of cash or assets, or could be from banks through the form of lending. The third group we've termed regulators, and that in this group we're considering those that set reporting requirements for non-profits or any other legal requirements with which they have to comply. And finally, we've included society at large. We think this is important because members of the public, even if they don't use services themselves, trust that non-profit organisations are working in the best interests of the communities of which they are a part. So that's really, really important. The consultation paper also proposes 4 main areas of interest for stakeholders, which capture their needs as users of financial information. The 4 that we've identified are firstly about whether a non-profit organisation is meeting its objectives. Is it delivering what it said it was going to deliver? The second one is around, is it delivering those objectives in a way that maximizes economy, efficiency and effectiveness? Is it actually utilizing its resources well? Then we move on to whether in doing so, are they actually carrying out their activities in a way that complies with restrictions and regulations? And this would include any restrictions over the use of donations or assets that have been provided to it. And finally, is it operating with regard to the longer term health of the entity? In other words, it's got operations that are sustainable in the longer term, rather than just pursuing something for the here and now. And we think that when met, these needs support accountability to a full range of stakeholders and aid their decision making. And in defining it in this way, we think that these needs are not focused on any one stakeholder or stakeholder group, but on the general needs of stakeholders, the things that they have that are in common. So in going through defining NPOs and stakeholders, we've touched on the first 2 chapters of what is in part 1 of the consultation paper. I'm now going to turn to chapter 3 of the consultation paper, which focuses on the two key premises that we're proposing to underpin the guidance. And we see this as essential to meeting stakeholder information needs and the guidance objectives. The first premise is that the guidance will be accrual based. The chapter notes that the type of financial reporting carried out in jurisdictions will depend on a number of factors. And that includes the requirements of local financial reporting guidance, the legal form of an entity, and the influence that donors have over the financial reporting of an entity. But the consultation paper looks at three bases of preparing accounts: cash, modified cash, and accrual. And just for the sake of clarity, by cash, we mean that economic events and transactions are recognised when cash is received and paid, and that assets and liabilities are not recognised. By modified cash, we mean that some economic events and transactions are recognised on a cash basis, but others are recognised on an accrual basis. And that means that some assets and liabilities are recognised, but not all of them. And when we talk about accrual, we mean that all economic events and transactions are recognised when the event occurs. And that means that all assets and liabilities are recognised. So we have three bases that we discuss in the consultation paper. And in talking about them, we also compare the advantages and disadvantages of each of these. And we do that in the context of the guidance objectives that I showed you at the very beginning. In our analysis, we acknowledge the possible challenges around existing knowledge and capability to use accrual-based standards, and also the potential for complexity that might introduce. It also acknowledges that donors may require cash-based information or information that is not fully accrual-based. But the chapter explains that accrual-based accounting is internationally recognised as the best basis to achieve a comprehensive view of an organisation's financial performance and position. It improves quality and transparency of financial reports and enhances accountability and decision making. And for that reason, accrual-based information is what we're proposing to be part of the guidance. So the second premise is that the guidance will include non-financial reporting in its scope. Arguably, non-financial reporting is more important for non-profit organisations than it is for other types of entity, as it provides an opportunity to explain more about what the organisation is delivering that wouldn't be found in financial statements. So non-financial reporting might include areas such as an entity's nature, that is the purpose of the organisations, its objectives and forward strategy. It would also include risks and its regulatory compliance as well, which are really important. And non-financial reporting, of course, could also be used to demonstrate the impact that the NPO is having through the delivery of its projects and programs, and also the wider benefits of its activities. So non-financial reporting can provide context to financial information. It can provide additional information about the organisation's activities that is useful to meet broader financial information needs of stakeholders. So that's kind of all I wanted to say by way of introduction to those topics. We've got a small group with us today, so we're going to carry out our discussion as one group. So just bear with me as I skip through a couple of slides, because this is also kind of created for bigger groups than we have today. So I'll just skip through our protocol for breakout groups, where we have in other meetings broken into smaller groups because we've had a larger audience. And these are the questions that we would like to touch on in today's discussion. And I think Richard is very kindly going to lead the discussion for us on this. And we're going to focus firstly on question 1. We've got about 30 minutes to discuss these questions in our timetable. And we'll take as much time as we need to in going through those. I suspect we might get through all of the questions, but if we don't, that's not a problem for us at all. So Richard, can I hand over to you and ask you to kind of lead the discussion of the questions?
No problem at all. Thank you very much, Karen, and thank you, Sam. And it's great to see everyone on the call today. My name is Richard Lloyd-Biffle. I work for SIPFA in the Public Financial Management Directorate with Karen. So I'm just going to take us through today's question. I'll also put the question in the chat. I'll just copy and paste that now for you. So who are the key stakeholders for NPOs in your jurisdictions? What are the requirements that currently exist for non-financial information reporting? So how do these align with the groups outlined in the IFR4NPO consultation paper that Karen just took us through on the slides? And what are the information needs are common to these stakeholders? So just to manage the conversation, it'd be great if anyone wants to come in to put your hand up, and you can do that by, if I can work out how to do it, how people put their hand up, or if everyone could stick their camera on, if you give a little wave, I'll be more than happy to keep an eye out for anyone who wants to come in. So has anyone got any initial thoughts to kick us off on this particular topic?
Hi, Richard. This is Rakesh Lachana.
Hi, Rakesh.
So, I mean, we know that the typical public and donor would be the key stakeholders. I think what might be unique here is that some non-profits set up their entity as private companies within our jurisdiction. And what that means is that they then have reporting responsibilities to the tax authorities and to the government, even though it's not a for-profit organization. And so I would add that to what really, the stakeholders of concern that we have sometimes beyond the general donor or general public. Another issue is that you might find some nonprofit organizations being part of larger worldwide groups. So there might be a shareholding or control of the entity by a foreign company set up in the US or another jurisdiction.
Okay. Well, that's very interesting. So very much the tax authority acts as more in the regulatory sort of position, you'd say. So no, thank you, Rakesh. It's really great to start us off. Has anyone got any other key stakeholders we might identify that we put within these groups that we've said in the consultation?
Our major stakeholders are in the environmental area.
Okay.
And what happens is that we allocate funds for various environmental projects. We also cover projects related to children. Mm-hmm. And so we have a very broad portfolio of organizations that we work with who are our stakeholders. We also have donors, both international and local. The majority of the local are corporations that move funds through the organization to the various beneficiaries. But the international donors have now recognized that the kind of reporting we do and the way that we run our organization is such that they are able to give us a chunk of funds for us to be able to do projects in the environmental area, for instance, or in the children's area.
Thank you very much, Robert. So you've got quite a wide range of beneficiaries and service users that come under the portfolio of these charities.
Yeah, we cover about sometimes in the range of 100 organizations that we deal with individually. on an annual basis. So, you know, it very quickly, well, some of them do projects so well that we give them, you know, other benefits down the road. But the point is that we work, for instance, with people who are in forest protection or in areas where they are going to be doing sustainable job creation. Let's say it's a beekeeping operation or whatever that we're going to fund in those areas. So we have a very broad scope of types of projects that we fund. And we kind of look at all of them as exciting and different. But some of them, you know, you run into a problem where the people are not able to properly account for the money, or they're not using it the right way. And you have to cut it off and then try and reorganize them or whatever. But, you know, I would say 90% of the cases, we do have very positive outcomes, and we're happy with the way that things go.
Thank you very much, Robert. So does anyone else have any other key stakeholders that they have to work with in their jurisdiction? We've talked about the tax authority, we've talked about the beneficiaries and the service users. Has anyone got any other stakeholders that are very important within your jurisdiction? I'll just keep an eye out for any hands, or if people want to come in.
Can I ask a question? Sorry, I'm trying to work out how to put my hand up. I've got too many things open, so apologies for that. Can I just ask a question, Robert, just following up on what you were saying? So we've got kind of stakeholders as one big group, and you just talked about kind of there's a really diverse range of beneficiaries. Does having one group of beneficiaries hold water, or is there anything that you think from a financial reporting perspective might differentiate them?
Well, let me tell you, it varies, because I'm also associated with another organization that actually gets funds from the organization I was speaking about was the Environmental Foundation of Jamaica. And that funds a number of organizations, but I'm also on a board that manages the Blue and Jongra Mountains National Park. And that organization now has sub-organizations that we deal with. So it's very difficult to say that, you know, you have one set of donors that's better than another. You know, I think that's what you're trying to get at, that it may be, sorry, go ahead.
It was just kind of different, right? Whether there were, because of the diversity, whether there were any differences in those kinds of stakeholders. You know, talking about a stakeholder group of as being service recipients, is it okay to talk about them as one group, or in your experience, actually, are there different? Do they have different needs, or indeed do they care about financial reporting?
Oh, I think first of all, there are different needs, yes. And secondly, all of them care about financial reporting. The most important group, obviously, is going to be your donors, because if they feel that you are not properly accounting for the funds that you are disbursing or the funds that you are getting from them, then they're not going to be too confident to continue to fund you down the road. That's number one. Number two, the people who actually benefit are very important from the perspective that if they feel that there's some bias in the way that you are allocating the funds, you know, for whatever reason, then you're going to run into problems from the people who you are supposed to be benefiting. And we have a kind of a mixed structure where we have members who are part of like a steering committee, if you will, or an oversight committee that come from the people that we benefit. And then we also have a board of directors that has representatives of one or two key donors. And one of the key donors to the organization from the outset was USAID. So the United States has a donor, a representative on the board. And this organization was created out of a debt swap. So again, it's US money that was swapped. The government of Jamaica owed the United States a significant amount of money. And instead of paying back the US, what we agreed was that this money would be put into the fund. And then that fund would be used for environmental and child purpose development projects. So I hope I haven't gone into too much, but you can understand that it's a mixed bag.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll just read off some of the comment we've had on the chat from Donna, who's standing in for Marsha Brandon today in Barbados. One of the key stakeholders, government. I personally believe that we have issues pertaining to our worth as a sector. I believe international reporting standards will help us with the perception of others with respect to the NPOs and our relevance in the communities we serve. Thank you very much for your comment, Donna. Apologies for having mic issues. So just focusing back on the question, just moving on to the sort of the second part of the questions in terms of what information needs are common to these stakeholders. We've outlined quite a few, and there's quite a variety of stakeholders, especially in the service recipient area. Is there any commonality in the information that needs to be provided to stakeholders? And in terms of the information that we've stated in the consultation paper, has anyone got any thoughts or comments on that? Or if anyone would like to add anything to the first part of the question, anyone got any thoughts? Oh, Timuri, can you see you're talking, but you're on mute. Would you, if you like to come in?
Maybe I can comment on the information needs part. I mean, I haven't seen anything unique or anything that hasn't been covered before. You know, I mean, if I go back to the tax authority area, you know, they tend to look at what aspects of the non-profit organization might be involved in profit-making activities and try to zero in on how can you quantify the profit element, or if there is an aspect of this that is subject to taxation.
Okay.
I think so. I think I know in the paper you talked about that non-profits do have profit-making aspects to them, but those profits are used in the non-profit side of the entity.
Okay.
But the tax authorities might have a different view in that first it must be taxed before it goes into that second side of the business or the activities.
So does this impact your financial reporting, having to prepare on different bases for different stakeholders? In this particular example, you may have to do different bases.
In our jurisdiction, the IFRS would be the only accepted reporting framework. So what you find is persons usually do like a modified cash basis, and you know the auditors are forced to qualify their opinion in this regard. All right, so the tax authorities would accept an accruals basis for that segment of the business that generates profits.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. So in terms of other stakeholders, Timur, sorry, I know you wanted to come in. Do you want to come in now?
Yes, hello from Georgia, Tbilisi to everyone. In Georgia, we have many international organizations, non-profit organizations, and small local organizations. And major donors and same time stakeholders are USAID and European Commission. And they have, as you know, special requirements for reporting. I mean, USAID requirements and Commission requirements. But in Georgia, we have also a special standard for non-profit organization in accounting this based on accrual basis. But same time they can provide financial information and reporting in accordance with IFRS and in accordance with IFRS for SMEs also. But in practice, big and medium organizations use accrual accounting systems, but small ones use cash basis accounting. This is reality in Georgia. Georgian government also, we can call them as stakeholders, but mostly they care about taxation issues, and of course some different projects is interesting for governments also, but other part of stakeholders are public sector, for whom provides this several projects in media, in some democracy development, and some business development projects. This is general situation in Georgia, non-profit sector. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Oh, Karen?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on that because it hasn't come up so far. So I think, Rakesh, you talked about accrual basis and IFRS in your jurisdiction, but we do hear a lot of people use cash accounting for small entities that exist, and that kind of has a bearing. I just wondered whether that was something that others in the meeting experienced as well. Is there a lot of cash accounting in your jurisdictions, and if so, which types of entities? If you're shy, please use the chat, which is just try to get your feedback. It'll be really good.
We deal with a lot of cash accounting for projects where, an organization like Lions Club or something like that will have a specific project to plant 500 trees in an area or something like that. And we allocate the funds and they spend it, and we account for it, or they account for it. But when it comes to organizations, what is happening now in Jamaica certainly is that if you are going to be established as a long-term organization involved in not-for-profit activities, then you have to become registered as a charity. And this is very similar in the US, for instance, where you have to have charity status. And charity status implies that your directors and various people have to meet certain standards, and they have to be approved by the Charities Oversight Organization of government. One of the big problems was that some NGOs that were not properly registered and didn't have a board of directors or anything were making public statements criticizing the government and raising issues that were not very comfortable for the government. So what they did was they said, look, if you guys want to be recognized as NGOs, what you need to do is register as a charity so that we know who you are, who your directors are, and what is your real purpose in life, rather than just, forming an organization overnight, calling yourself ABC, and then going out there and criticizing everybody. So I think it's put a lot of order in the system, if you will, in terms of the way that nonprofits are organized.
Thanks very much, Robert. Does anyone else have anything to add to that in terms of other jurisdictions that might have to use cash basis in a lot of entities as well? Is anyone else got anything they want to add further to that?
In Georgia, cash basis accounting is allowable for only private entrepreneurship, only for individuals only.
Thank you. I must say, apologies, Simon, Karen, I have lost track of the time, so I'm not sure how much time we've got left on this question. We've got plenty of time.
If you want to move on to the next question, that's fine. You've got time. I'll give you fair warning when we need to close out.
Okay. Before I move on to the next question, has anyone got any last comments that they'd like to make on this first question on the key stakeholders or the groups, or before we move on, and just any closing comments? We've just had another comment from Donna. Since there is no regulation in Barbados, charities and NGOs are not restricted. However, accounting is part of our requirement for government regulations. Okay, thank you very much, Donna. I guess we'll move on to the next question then, shall we? I will just put it in the chat for everyone. Okay. So this next question is, what requirements currently exist in your jurisdictions for non-financial information reporting? And then going on from that, what are the advantages and disadvantages of existing non-financial information reporting arrangements? So has anyone got any examples that are within your jurisdictions, what non-financial information that you might put in your accounts to support the traditional financial reporting information that you have in there? Any performance information or information about what you're offering, narrative to support your charity activities? Have we got anyone who'd like to start with any examples of what you provide or are required to provide in potential examples?
I could start by saying there are none. Okay,
that's great. Do you think there is anything that might be detailed in the consultation paper, or any thoughts on what should be issued locally in terms of non-financial information? What you think would add value to your financial reporting?
I think it really, it depends on the type of non-profit organization that you're dealing with, and I think each one will have some sort of unique reporting requirements based on the type of service they're meant to provide to the public. If you're a society dealing with persons with disabilities, then you might find that your reporting would be very different than if you're dealing with, say, flood-prone areas or something like that.
Thank you very much. Does anyone else have anything to add to this question in terms of, is there any existing arrangements in your jurisdictions for non-financial information in a different jurisdiction that may be in place?
I don't know that there are a lot of controls or requirements or all that for non-financial reporting, but I do know that from the perspective of those NGOs that are highly regarded, what they do is they report on whether they're achieving their objectives and whether they're obviously satisfying the needs of their donors, etc. But one important factor that we look at is the cost of operations in relation to the amount of money that is going to organizations that we're supposed to be doling money out to and getting projects done. And we try, in the case of the Environmental Foundation of Jamaica, because we're like a management group of funds, right, that go to the smaller NGOs. What we try and do is keep our operational costs at a level where it is a maximum of 15% of the amount of money that we distribute, so that we don't see, management and accounting and traveling and things like that going out of whack in terms of what our whole purpose is, which is to fund money to go to environmental or children issues. So that's an important thing that we try to keep a watch on. And it's not something that is mandated or government requires or whatever. It's just that in order to make it very transparent to your donors and to your people who are beneficiaries that, you know, you're doing a good job of managing the money.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Robert. Is just to follow up on that point, is there anything that you do that's more on the non-financial aspect of that, say about the performance of the funds that you allocate, or anything wider, or the arrangements, the governance around issuing the funds to supplement the financial, the costs of doing so?
Yeah, well, we actually give a very detailed report because it looks at each project that we fund. What were the objectives of the project? Was it, if you want, let's give an example. You are going to plant out 10 hectares of forest in an area, and you're going to set it up so that over a period of a year, you're going to make sure that the plants don't just die, but they survive. You report on a regular basis over the period how many you have planted, what sort of condition. You give reports in terms of pictures of the actual plants and all that. So, you know, we do give pretty detailed reports to our donors of whether we are achieving what we say we're going to achieve or not.
Thank you very much. Just another contribution from Donna. Except for being open to the public, there is no requirement for non-financial information in Barbados, as far as I know. However, charities now tend to go for impact reporting, which is way more effective. So that's very interesting. Does anyone else on the group in their own jurisdictions look at impact reporting and in terms of providing non-financial information, or? Can't see any hands up, but
it sounds like Jamaica and Barbados are kind of well represented, but are there others in the Caribbean, that particularly English-speaking Caribbean, that are on this chat?
Mm-hmm.
I'm coming from Guyana.
Arakesh?
No, I was just replying to Robert's question that I'm in Guyana.
Ah, thank you.
Hi, so my name is Karen Phillip, and I'm representing the Caribbean Policy Development Center, which Bango, who Donna is a member of, is representing us quite well. That's why I have been silent, because what she's stating is quite accurate for our situation in Barbados. And I do agree with a lot of the statements that Mr. Stevenson raised from the Environmental Foundation of Jamaica, that there's a need for, while we want to hold the governments to a certain level of accountability and transparency, if the NGOs don't have the resources or don't have the same transparency for themselves, it weakens the voice and the advocacy positions that we have. However, understanding that donors have moved from programmatic funding more to project funding, it's hard for us to achieve these levels of transparency and accountability, and to be able to afford an audit and to be able to afford the necessary accountant staff and whatnot that goes with these financial requirements. So it's a tight rope that we have to walk in the Caribbean. And then also with FACTA coming on and the governments adopting these guidelines and these frame rules sort of without consultation from the general public or without understanding how the sector actually works, there are challenges of the government trying to ask us to hire a compliance officer when we barely have money to pay for the project staff to do the work. So it's a mouthful, but there's a lot of factors that we have to take into consideration when we are talking about the financial situations or the financial transparencies and accountability tools that we use as the sector in the Caribbean. I hope I did not lose you all with my train of thought.
Oh, no, thank you. Thank you very much. No, I think
I can add to that. This is Marlene from Barbados.
Emily.
You hear me?
Yep, can hear you great, Molly.
If I can add to that, what we find is more the issue is not the reporting itself, is the capacity, because I find that donors seem to think of us more as countries that have maybe 50 million, 10 million people, and not as countries that only have 280,000 or even less citizens. So the organizations, the NPOs are very, very small, they're minute, and you don't have enough people on the ground to actually do the financial reporting. And sometimes you're not going to get monies in the grant to do that reporting. We have run into that problem more than once, where we're just a few people doing the work. We've done it correctly. We have everything. We have all the invoices, etc. But we don't have the ability to put it into the type of environment that the donor would want. And if we had some technical funds under the grant, that would allow us to hire an accountant that can put it into the way that that grantee would want, then that will be much easier. But many times the grantor says, we're not giving you any money except for the project itself, not to hire anyone outside. So then you're at a standstill, because how do you report effectively on the project that you have accomplished? So that's one of our problems, is more, to me, the capacity. And even when we say to them, look, we only have a few people in this organization because we are just 280,000 people in the whole country. We have lots of organizations for almost everything. So we may be 10 people, we may be 5 people. How do we go about making sure that we report the finances? And it's almost like they don't care. They say either do it or don't take the money. And then you're between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah.
That's my contribution.
Can I suggest an approach to that? What we've been doing is, at the Environmental Foundation, we have sought 1 or 2 accountants who can provide services to a number of small NGOs. So the NGOs will pull together all their bills, their receipts, their documents, etc. at the end of each month, take it to this accountant, and the accountant puts together the reports and submits that back to the NGO, and then the NGO goes through it, makes sure everything is correct, and then
I think Robert may have frozen.
Yeah, I'm going to have to call time, I think, on that session. And just as we were just getting going, so if you've got any more thoughts that you want to add that you didn't get the chance to speak, or the last few points have stimulated something in your mind, please do feel free to add those to the chat, and we'll capture those. I'd like to welcome, we've seen a couple of people have joined us. We've just been discussing chapters 1 to 3 in the consultation paper and some of the issues around that. And what I'm going to do now is move us on to the final 2 chapters of part 1 of the consultation paper. So I'm just going to share my screen again. And kind of move us on into the next session. But that was really great in terms of the contributions you're making. It was really helpful to hear what you've got to say. So please, I would encourage you to continue to share your views, whether you do it orally or in the chat. Is either way is good for us. So thank you very much. So if I can just move us on, if my computer will allow. Let me just move this on to the next slide. So what we're going to do now is to look at what guidance already exists and how it can be used to develop guidance specifically for NPOs. We're proposing to start with guidance that already exists, because that will help us to produce guidance more quickly. Starting from scratch to develop accounting standards takes a very long time to do. And we recognise that the need for this is now. We hear it time and time again. So in our work, we've looked at both existing international guidance as well as national guidance. A number of countries have developed NPO-specific standards for use by the non-profit organisations in their jurisdiction. And our experience is that national guidance tends to be built on the standards being used for either the public sector or the private sector, or indeed in some places it's actually built on both. And our experience is also that the guidance that's developed in individual countries is designed to meet those country-specific requirements and their context. So it takes account of the local legal requirements that exist, as well as community expectations. And so we've seen that national guidance can be built on international frameworks, or indeed on local general accepted accounting practice. It can vary. But what that means is that in terms of the different sets of national guidance that exist, if you're looking at one individual topic, the guidance that exists can vary depending on which country you're in. So there isn't kind of one go-to place as a source of information. And also, while national guidance has been developed through local due process and has well thought out positions, it hasn't been considered outside of that country's context, and it hasn't been through international due process in terms of gathering other input to it. So to increase the likelihood of adoption internationally, the view of the project team is that non-profit guidance should be based on an international framework that has been through international due process and has an accepted conceptual base. So having concluded that international guidance would provide a better base, Chapter 4 of the consultation paper examines the extent to which the three international frameworks, that is IFRS, International Financial Reporting Standards, IFRS for SMEs, and IPSAS, the International Public Sector Accounting Standards, would allow the project objectives to be met. And to do this, what we did was examine each of those frameworks against three criteria. And the three criteria we looked at was whether the framework would address NPO-specific issues, the likelihood that non-profit organisations would be familiar with standards, or how easy it might be to use a particular framework. And then we also looked at the feasibility of producing guidance within the project resources and timeline. This analysis showed us that no one framework performs well across all of those three criteria. IPSAS performed better on NPO-specific accounting issues, and that's most likely because there are similarity in terms of transactions that are for social benefit. So you can harness that. But IFRS for SMEs performed better on ease of use and feasibility. Again, primarily because it's a single standard that's intended to be used by a variety of different bodies. It has some of the complexities that exist with the IFRS and IPSAS full suite of standards removed. So it's more stripped back in that respect, and it's only updated periodically, whereas IFRS and the IPSAS suite of standards are effectively under constant review. So IFRS for SMEs is a more stable base on which to build. We also felt that it would be more feasible, or someone has their mic on. If you could make sure that you're on mute, that would be great. Thank you. So we felt it was more feasible for the team to be able to build on IFRS with the resources that we have, because it has a more stable base. So with no one framework meeting all of the needs, we are proposing a model that actually uses and accesses all three of the existing international frameworks, as well as national standards. So we're proposing a model that uses IFRS for SMEs as its foundational framework, giving it that stable base that I talked about, but also meaning that there is guidance for all types of accounting transactions. But as I said before, we know from our analysis that IFRS for SMEs doesn't address all NPO specific issues. So in this model, we're proposing that full IFRS and IPSAS and their conceptual frameworks would also be used alongside IFRS for SMEs, where it doesn't address an NPO specific issues. And we also propose that the model draws on jurisdiction level guidance at the same time to develop NPO specific reporting solutions, because we know that these national standards have got some well thought out and well developed views about how to approach these issues. And we think this approach accesses the most appropriate elements of the existing guidance without starting from scratch. But the consultation paper does acknowledge that using different sets of guidance may run the risk of inconsistencies. But the differences between IFRS and IPSAS primarily relate to public sector issues, and where the transactions are common across both sectors, the accounting treatments are generally pretty similar. And also a lot of the national guidance is either built on international frameworks or is aligned to it. So where that happens as well, we would expect differences to be minimized. So that covers a discussion of what's in chapters 4 and 5 of the consultation paper. I'd like to split us into two groups to look at some questions that might arise from that. Just to give you some idea about how that is going to work, you'll be automatically assigned to a group, and that's a random allocation to that. We just ask you to remember which room you're in, just in case you get disconnected. You can be asked to be reconnected to the group that you were in. We will have a moderator in each of the rooms. So just as Richard moderated the first session, there'll be someone there to help navigate the questions, probe the reasons for your view, and just help the functioning of the group. In this time around, we'll ask somebody in the group to be a spokesperson for the group, and it's not the intention that the moderator is that spokesperson. We would ask that from a protocol point of view, if you'd like to join the conversation, that you put your hand up, either kind of physically on the screen so we can see it, or through the functions in Zoom, and wait to be asked to join the conversation. If your moderator disappears, please do keep going, don't stop, and I'm sure you can navigate that all between you. We would ask also as well that if you can and able to put your cameras on, it does help the conversation in smaller groups if people can see each other. I think that's the main thing. The recordings of the breakout, we do take recordings of the breakout groups, but those are purely for our purposes in the project to keep a record and help us in subsequent stages of the project. So we've got a number of questions relating to topic 2, which we've just looked at. We're going to focus on the first 2 of those. The first one is about the knowledge of international frameworks that exist in your jurisdictions amongst NPOs, auditors and stakeholders, and understanding a bit more about that. And the second question is about the guidance model that I just showed you, with it using a number of different frameworks, would that make it more easy or difficult for you to implement in your jurisdiction? And generally, what do you kind of see as the issues with using international and sort of national standards to back that up? So we're going to break into two groups now. You'll have about 20 minutes to discuss one of those questions that will come to you, and you'll be allocated to your groups now. And I look forward to seeing you in about 20 minutes. Does anyone need any help in joining your group? Robert, Javier, do you need any help? I hope you had some good discussions in your group. Would like to kind of share some of that discussion, as you've not all had the opportunity to hear from everyone else. So perhaps if I can turn to you, Richard, first in terms of your group. Perhaps you can remind everyone what question you were looking at, and look at who's going to provide some feedback. And we're obviously in the feedback looking for the most significant points raised in your discussions.
Thank you very much, Karen. So the question for our group was, what knowledge of international frameworks exists within your jurisdiction amongst NPOs, their auditors and stakeholders? To what extent do you think a framework based on international frameworks would be accepted in your jurisdiction? And what benefits would you envisage and what issues would you foresee? And Karen from the Caribbean Policy Development
Awesome.
kindly offered to be our spokesperson. So thank you very much, Karen.
Thank you, Karen.
Thank you so much. So we had a discussion over on the questions, and I think there was a general consensus about this as the right way to go, and that the framework seems to be acceptable. However, there is need for the small NGOs to use innovative ways, such as the suggestion of one accountant do the accounts for several NGOs. And I know for CPDC, we've reached out to Accounts for International Development, which is an international kind of volunteer organization based in the UK, and they have come to the Caribbean to do accounts and help with the bookkeeping and whatnot for some of our members, and also in Belize as well. So that's one way that the NGOs could try to be a little more innovative and to increase their accountability and transparency. And also the understanding of that with the increased accountability and transparency, it does lead to enhanced trust with the donors. However, all the donors are not the same, that we have different regulations from the US government and from the EU, and it causes a bit of conflict and a lot of juggling. So while we're saying that these things are feasible, we are also understanding that it's quite a mammoth size hula hoop that or whatever that we're jumping through, because we understand that it's, as my fellow colleague had said, that it's only like 3 people in an NGO, and we have to manage the different requirements from the different donors with what just wanting to do good and not necessarily having an accounting background. So I hope I represented our group well. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Karen. That was really clear in terms of what you're doing. And you'll probably not be surprised to know that some of the issues that you've raised here are issues that we've heard from other regional groups. So you're not on your own in this, but I think that what's come across really strongly for me is kind of the number of people on the front line versus the number of people in the organization, and how closely aligned they are, and therefore, you know, all of these reporting requirements, you know, really working out how to do that alongside everything else. So thank you for that. If anyone has got anything that they'd like to add to what Karen has said, please feel free to use the chat and add to the comments. But that was really helpful, Karen. Thank you very much indeed. And so Sam, can I turn to you, please, to hear back from your group?
Sure. So we took the second question, which was really looking at that model. What would help you adopt the model or make it more difficult? This is basing on IFRS for SME with the other add-ons. What changes could be made to make it good to, you know, to more user-friendly for the jurisdiction? So Rakesh from BDO in Guyana has kindly agreed to feedback for us. Thank you so much.
Hi, Rakesh.
Hi, Karen. Thanks, Sam. I think some of our discussions aligned with Group 1. You know, the need to get help, the need to because the professional capabilities might not be within the NGOs, and what happens when you're doing reporting to a foreign entity or a foreign donor that is in a country with their own requirements or have specified their own private requirements outside of what the standards have. We agreed, you know, using the IFRS for SMEs would be a good base. But we would want to see that there is buy-in from the international jurisdictions, especially the UK, Canada, New Zealand, who have all, you know, have their own frameworks, because we wouldn't want a situation where we adopt this standard and the larger countries are not on board. And in terms of, you know, customizing, we would want it to be as simplified as possible, and of course being kept up to date as the international standards are kept up to date. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that. It is kind of interesting what you pull out about sort of the larger countries and what they're doing. I mean, interestingly, because the standards in the UK are actually based on IFRS for SMEs. People talk about FRS 102, which is the kind of the core standard in the UK. But actually that's based on IFRS for SMEs. So the UK is actually an example of a jurisdiction that is using it. But New Zealand is based on IPSAS and Australia is based on IFRS. So there are many different models for doing this. And I think that's what we're going to need to do, is kind of explain all of that as we develop it. And so that there is confidence. I think what perhaps you're alluding to really is confidence that IFRS for SMEs is a good place to start. If I'm putting words in your mouth, please do correct me. You can either do it right now or you can put something in the chat around that. So it's really helpful to hear that.
Can I add one comment, Karen, which is really that some of these larger countries might not, you know, ditch what they have and bring in new guidance, copy paste. They might be more inclined to align to it over time, but that would still be okay, and it would still bring that consistency over time, like we've seen in the private sector. So we kind of, you know, those are all acceptable outcomes, if you like, from a project point of view.
Yeah. But good to understand, and I think we'll start to see this develop over time, is kind of what's the bar for people wanting to adopt this, and I think you in many ways kind of raise an interesting bar there, Rakesh, and I guess ones as the project develops that we'll kind of come back to. So thank you very much for that. And as before, if anyone wants to add anything into the chat on the feedback that you've heard to those questions, please feel free to do so. But really good to kind of hear the key points from those discussions. I'm just going to hand back to Sam for a moment, and we'll just look at how you can respond to part one before we have a very short break. Sam, over to you.
Great, thank you. Now I've just lost my document. Where is it? Oh yeah, here it is. Okay. Yes. So what we've done so far with those first two questions is really taken you through part one of the consultation, and we hope you feel ready and inspired to respond. You have some opinions on the discussion, the questions that we've been discussing. So now it's really just a matter of how. We've tried to make it as easy as possible, and there are 3 different ways that you can share your views. And if you go to the website, all the information is there. It's www.IFR4NPO.org. And obviously we'll put that in the chat, and it will be in the follow-up email as well. So the 3 ways: if your organization already has a process for submitting comments on accounting standards, so that's more likely to be an audit organization or professional accountancy organization. If that's something that you're used to doing, then you can submit a comment letter in the normal way via the website. If you'd like to submit a response as an organization or as a group, if you'd like to collaborate with others or work offline, then option 2 is to download a Word template, which has all the questions. Then you can fill it in offline and then upload it again via the website when you're finished. And then the third option is great if you're submitting as an individual. It's just an online survey. There are separate surveys for part 1 and part 2, and there are separate, in the second option, there are also separate templates for part 1 and part 2. And on the survey, once you've started it and you've input your personal information about, your country and the stakeholder type and things like that, you can save it and come back to it until you're ready to submit. And in fact, for all of the different processes, you don't need to answer all the questions. You can pick the bits that are of interest and relevance to you, that you have something you'd like to share, or you can do it all, that's fine. But we just really want to make sure we make it easy for you to share your voice. We'd love to hear your input. So we hope you feel motivated and confident to submit a response, even if you've never done something like this before. If we get a large number of responses from regions all over the world, it will absolutely add to the quality and the credibility, the relevance and the usefulness of the guidance that we produce. So please go ahead and do that. We're going to take a 10-minute break now before we get into our final session, which will be now moving into part 2 and getting a sense of different accounting issues. So please do come back promptly so that we can look at our approach to those individual accounting issues facing MPOs. So it's 9 minutes to the hour for me now. So if we can come back 1 minute past the hour. It's a real,
very precise.
Very precise. Just after the hour, and we can finish off our time together. Thanks.
Yeah. So please do take the opportunity to stretch your legs, grab a coffee, go to the bathroom, and we'll see you back here in about 10 minutes time. Look forward to seeing you then. Thanks. And finally, issues that relate to the presentation, content and scope of financial statements. If you count up the issues that are on the slide in front of you, you'll see that we've identified 22 issues so far from our research. And these are really diverse. They range from a definition and disclosure of fundraising costs to how to account for inventory that is being held to distribute to service recipients. So there's a whole range in there. But as part of the consultation, we want to know if we've captured all of the issues. Have we missed any out unintentionally? Are there things that should be on this list that aren't on there? And indeed, the other way, are there things that are on this list that you think are not particularly relevant for nonprofits in your jurisdiction? With such a long list of issues, we've needed to decide where to prioritize our efforts to achieve the highest impact for the first set of guidance. So we want to focus on those issues that could add value globally, the greatest value globally and within the project line timeline and resources. So we want to get the greatest bang for our buck, really, in terms of the issues that we select. And to help us do this, we looked at this through the lens of 4 criteria to try and determine the highest priorities. The first of those criteria is prevalence. And by prevalence, we mean, is this particular issue widespread globally? Do we see it, in, all 5 continents? Is that where it exists? We've also put a criteria around consequence. And when we're talking about consequence, we're looking at whether there is an impact on users or readers of financial statements. So if we don't address an issue, is that going to impair the ability of a reader of financial reports to obtain information that's going to help them with accountability and decision making? So is there a consequence for users if we don't address this? The third criteria that we have is about demand, and that goes to, has the issue been raised by multiple stakeholder groups, or is there a single stakeholder group globally who rates this issue as really important? So the demand has got a push factor attached to it. People are, want to see a resolution of this particular issue, which is slightly different to prevalence. And then the fourth criteria is about feasibility. Can we find a technically sound solution within the time and resources available and not adversely impact completion of the project? For example, we wouldn't want to spend all of our time and energy on addressing a single issue when there are many more out there. So we want to make sure that we're sort of trading that off and thinking about what's the best outcome. And so using these criteria, we've prioritized those issues that rate the most highly across all of the criteria rather than a single one. And as part of the consultation paper, we are asking, is this the right way to prioritize the issues? And no doubt you'll have views on that when you see kind of what made the short list of issues that we're thinking about including in the guidance. So using these criteria, the topics that we've determined to have the highest priority are shown in this slide in front of you. These are the 10 topics that across those criteria seem to us to be the ones that we should prioritize. And just picking out a few of these, so we're proposing to include a topic on non-exchange revenue. And this topic would include grants received, it would include cash donations, it would include gifts in kind, and it would include services in kind. And based on our understanding of these types of revenue, the key issues that have come across to us around when to recognise this type of revenue, how do you determine the value for gifts in kind and services in kind, and what kind of disclosures should you make? So that's one of the topic areas. We're also proposing to look at classification of expenses. And in this, we're looking at what kind of analysis should be used. International standards allow either analysis by nature or function, but there is a question about whether we've got a preference of one over the other. And should there be defined categories for non-profits, because that would aid consistency and comparability. And is that a place we should go? And finally, another area is the presentation of financial statements, where we look at how funds with restrictions are presented in the financial statements. And this includes what is commonly termed fund accounting, where assets that have restrictions are separated out from other assets in the financial statements. So these 10 topics that we had, as I said, have been identified because the issues are prevalent. There are consequences for readers if they're not addressed. There is demand globally, and we can address these within the resources of the project, or at least we think we can. And the consultation paper seeks views on whether we are prioritizing the right issues Are these the right issues for you? That's really my introduction to the overview of part 2. And as before, we'll just break into two groups and look at some questions there. But before I do that, I just wanted to touch on donors, and that's come up a few times already in the feedback that we've had. And we've heard a lot about the implications of donor requirements from, I think, all of the regional groups that we've talked to so far. And I think, just to remind you that Sam said at the beginning that we have established a donor reference group, and we'll be using this group to better understand the perspective of donors and the extent to which we can use this project to get greater consistency. And so I just wanted to reassure you that this was not something that is definitely not forgotten by us or being ignored, and it's a really important part of what we're doing. And as we're trying to kind of get consistency and a common approach to these topics, that donor community is something that we're taking with us on our journey. So to the questions that we want to look at in relation to this topic, again, there are 3 questions, and you'll have one of these to look at. Question 1 is about how you prioritize NPO-specific financial reporting issues. We're suggesting here that you look at your top 3 issues and your reasons for these issues. We want to understand what are the factors that mean that some issues for you have a higher priority than others. In question 2, we want to kind of understand what are the most important or most significant accounting, NPO-specific accounting issues in your jurisdictions, and whether there are any particular transactions that lead to difficulty. And the final question is about common reporting solutions that might improve accountability and decision making, and how that might take place. So as before, we will put you into a breakout group to discuss a question. You again have about 20 minutes to discuss that question, and you'll be allocated into that room now. And I look forward to seeing you in about 20 minutes to hear your thoughts about those questions. Hopefully I will see you all very soon. Hi, Carlene. Do you need any help getting into your breakout group? So welcome back for the last time in our meeting today. And as before, it would be really good to capture the key points that came out from the discussions in your groups. And perhaps this time I can ask to start with Sam and get some input back from the group that you were involved in.
Sure. So our question was about what are the most significant accounting issues in your jurisdictions? We did. I confess we didn't have a very jurisdiction-based conversation in the experiences of people in the room. And the lovely Dion has agreed to feedback for us. So thank you, Dion.
Hi, Dion.
Hi. Okay, so our group had discussed a number of issues that everybody is faced with. And the biggest one was the exchange rate and how do we account for the differences in the exchange rate, because every donor has a different exchange rate that they might want you to use. And you're receiving monies in your local currency sometimes, and how do you classify those monies? Where do you put them? How do you account for them? Because if they're asking for a particular rate to be used, and then you get into a different rate, how do you treat that? Another big issue was in-kind contribution, and how do you value your in-kind contributions, because some donors do not recognize in-kind contributions, while some donors have a system in place, and that's something that definitely we need to touch on a bit more. Expenditure classification in terms of assets, and because some donors might ask you to recognize an asset in a particular way, while some just expense it out.
Yeah.
Is it a case that we're going to be using? Another is how are we going to classify the assets using historical costing, fair value costing? What exactly are we going to be using? Another one is the reporting. Every donor has a different reporting template, and what you come to realize that this stems from your chart of accounts, and every time you have to be modifying your chart of accounts to fit into the donor requirements, because of course, as time change and the nature of the NGO change, because no NGO starts off just doing one thing and continue doing that, because time change and the need for things change, and you want to stay relevant and you want to be contributing to different things. So you might decide to apply for a different type of grant, and you will not continue doing the same things that you start out with. So again, your chart of account might have to change, again, modifying your expenditure. And so there's no one set way of reporting. So if we could get like a standardized way that will fulfill all of the donors, that would be great. But that might be something almost an impossible task to get done. I think that was about it. I don't think I'm missing anything. Have I missed anything, group members?
They're all rushing to say that you did. No, that sounds really comprehensive. If anyone has got anything that they want to add, please feel free to add it into the chat. We'll wait to hear what Group 1 have to say, but exchange rate is something that is a constant theme that we hear from people, real difficulties around that. Likewise, in-kind contributions and expense classification, particularly around assets and for donors and assets, particularly where donors have a policy that assets are expensed. That's obviously not consistent with accrual-based accounts, so it can create some real tension. Really interesting to hear your thoughts about the chart of accounts. You're setting us a really difficult task if you're looking for us to solve that one. That might create another project, but actually it's kind of really important in how we frame this, because depending on how much standardization there is, that might be a real beneficial mechanism to kind of help people. So thank you very much for that contribution, and if there's anything else, please do add it into the chat. That will be gratefully received. So thank you for that. That's great. So I'm going to turn to you, Richard, and perhaps you can introduce a question for your group.
Thank you very much, Karen. Our question was, what are the 3 top accounting issues? Why are they important to resolve? And we I must say we didn't talk too much about the jurisdiction, but why we should prioritise some issues over the other, and Felicity will be speaking on our behalf today. So thank you very much, Felicity. But she was having a few internet connection problems, so hopefully she's there.
Hi, Felicity.
Hi, good day.
Hi.
So, as we discussed, some of the challenges we have, my colleague from Jamaica pointed out the QuickBooks in her regard was challenging, and I would assume that this is in relation to like the first group spoke on the chart of accounts, and every donor will have the various nature of transactions, and so the actual posting becomes an issue as it affects the account category. So that was one of our challenge. Also, recording transaction in a cash or accrual basis, that also is an issue or challenge rather. And thirdly, I spoke on the challenge of not specifically accounting. While we could agree that all or most donors have their different financial reporting templates in Excel and not really QuickBooks or Sage, any form of accounting package. For me, I was sharing with our group that one of the challenge has been due to COVID, we have been submitting high volume of with the financial templates as source document receipts, the scanning and the overload of actually sending in reporting to various donors and the back and forth of verification and so on. So those are some key things we spoke on, and those are some of the challenges we discussed.
Great, thank you very much for that, Felicity. And I don't know whether that's an encouraging or a disheartening degree of commonality with the first group. I guess all of those issues being there, but interesting to see kind of what comes to the top of, you know, the list for you in terms of the issues that you're concerned about. And you know, the donor reporting is clearly of significance here, and the ability to record transactions through chart of accounts or systems to support that. So that is kind of really interesting to hear. And the other point that I'm understanding from what you said is kind of around source documentation and having source documentation to support your applications. Is that right?
Not necessarily the application, but when the funding is granted, and we've gone into the actual reporting aspect, and let's say they did a disbursement and you're to report on maybe the first 50% of the disbursement, it requires you to submit not just the financial template, but your actual source documents. Reporting documents.
So great. No, thank you for clarifying that, and kind of again, very interesting. We hadn't seen that come up as an issue, but that's actually the second time today it's come up as an issue, source documentation, and maybe that's a reflection of COVID and things changing.
Yes, correct.
So maybe a reflection of time over which we've done these regional outreach sessions. That's really helpful. Thank you very much indeed, and thank you also for stepping forward and offering to provide the feedback. If anybody else in the group has anything they would like to add to what Felicity has said, if they please feel free to drop that in the chat, and we'll pick up your comments. But that the kinds of feedback that you're giving us here is really helpful for us in terms of progressing the conversation, and it's really helpful for us in doing that. I'm just going to hand back now to Sam to close out our session today. And if I can,
thank you so much, Karen. So let me just, final few words. Well done for lasting to the end of a marathon session. But honestly, it's been so stimulating and interesting hearing your views and your comments today. This conversation is so useful in giving us a colour and a regional view on some of the issues that we've been discussing. Again, I want to reiterate that what you've shared today doesn't constitute a formal response to the consultation paper. And according to international due process, we can only consider things that are formally submitted. So hopefully the conversation today has got you interested. It's helped to clarify some of the proposals that we're making and made you think about your view in them. So that the most important next step we'd really love to encourage for you is to go ahead and submit your own formal response, either as an individual or as an organization. As a reminder for that, the closing dates are the 30th of July for part 1. Those are those issues in the first 2 questions, and the 24th of September for part 2. So obviously you'll find it easier to respond while the part 1 issues are really fresh in your mind. And we showed you earlier how to do that. I should say on the part 2 responses, the first question is about, have we got the right issues? Are there issues that are really important to you that aren't on the list? And that's very much linked to the discussion that we were having earlier. Oops, sorry. My son. So we thought you might be curious to know as to what will happen to all your responses once you've submitted them. So we'll be analysing them from Q3 this year and using that information to shape the development of the draft guidance. It will depend a bit on the quantity of responses, but our hope is to issue draft guidance for comment in 2023. I'm trying to turn my phone on silent. There we go. That's how it works. So we will also continue the outreach work with stakeholder engagement in different parts of the world, following our stakeholder engagement strategy. We want to try and ensure that all groups with an interest or with influence over the outcome are aware and are able to input. So how can you stay connected and engaged in this process? Please do subscribe to our quarterly newsletters, which will keep you up to date. We're actually drafting the next one right now, so that should be, if you sign up, that should hit your inbox. I've put the link there in the chat. And then we have a LinkedIn page, IFR4NPO.org, where we have a number of conversations. We're having conversations around specific hot topics, different country events, all sorts of things happening in the LinkedIn page. So if you are on LinkedIn, please do follow that page so that you get and you can select to get notifications for things that we post there. And that would be a great way to stay in touch. You can also just, like and share and comment on posts that are put up in LinkedIn and on Twitter. And that just helps amplify the voice. It helps it get to more people so that we can get a more diverse and inclusive process, which is so important. You can also always email me and the project. I'll put my email address and the project email address there. Really happy to hear from you. So after this meeting, we'll be sending a follow-up mail. It might take a couple of days because we want to share the link to the video as well. And it will have the PowerPoint presentation and a recording. So if you have colleagues that, would have wanted to see this, but would like to, watch it afterwards, please do share it with them. Also, if you have colleagues in other parts of the world, we've got 2 more meetings after this one. One in, where's the next one? In Arabic.
North Africa.
North Africa and the Middle East in Arabic, and one for Western Central Africa in French. So if you have French speaking colleagues within the Caribbean, please do let them know if you think that it would be relevant. And again, all of those events are on our website, and it'd be great if you could share the word. So the very last thing I'd love us to do is to take a photo, actually. If you can put your camera on, I'm going to get a gallery view here, and give us a smile for a photo. That would be super. It can be the ones who lasted the whole 3.5 hours, the picture at the end of a marathon. So I don't know if you're able, Venetia, Felicity, or Katrina, to put your cameras on. If not, don't worry. But I'll just do a 1, 2, 3 smile, and we'll get a nice photo. So 1, 2, 3. Great, I've got it. That's lovely. Thank you so much, everybody. Really for your time. Not a huge group, but the quality rather than the quantity was really valuable today. Thank you so much. And thank you, Karen, for all that hard work.
I think Jeanette wants to say a few words. So.
Just one quick question. I really wanted to just thank everybody who responded to the reminders that went out. And just as an endorsement for cameras, Dion is actually familiar to me, but not until the cameras came on, guys, do we recognize each other. So I really wanted to thank CVC for asking Dion to represent them, and the rest who are here, Bobby, who had to leave earlier. But really importantly, Karen and Sam, there are others who I know really wanted to be here, and I'd indicated so, as is Marcia, and an emergency happened. So for those who missed this session and would really like to be with the next, is missing this session going to be a challenge for them picking up Karen, Sam, in the next one that we're gonna have?
The next one is in French and Arabic. So this is the last of the English. But later this year, we'll have another series of sessions on each of those part 2 topics. So we'll take a deeper dive on income, or we'll have a close look at assets or whatever. And those will actually all be in English, and we'll have them in time zones that are hopefully helpful for you guys in the Caribbean.
But it wouldn't be a problem if they wanted to attend the one in English to come, having missed this one. There's not that kind of continuity. All right, good.
No, absolutely.
But it's a deeper dive, so more auditors and accountants that we can get would be better, right, Karen?
Absolutely.
We will work on it. Thanks a million. Guys. Really great job with you.
And all the resources will be available that you can share with people who couldn't come, and they can listen to it in their own time if that's helpful. And we're always here to take questions. So really happy to help.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody. Really appreciate your time. It's been great meeting you all. Thank you.
Likewise.
Thank you.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Thank you.